Hi, Jake. So I know that you are particularly a dab hand with with the force plates, which is obviously a massive, like, growing area, emerging science, if you like, in sort of sports injuries and physio. Can you tell us a little bit about how you use them, how that's integrated into patient care?
Sure. I mean, look, we're so lucky to have a couple of sets at Complete, and it's so invaluable in terms of getting some data on where an individual's at in either their rehab
Yeah.
or to keep them doing their sport. So um, I really like to use it either as a way to um, guide the rehab process for an injury. So I'll typically utilize it either for sort of your more explosive movements,
Yeah.
like your jumps, your landing,
Yeah.
your hopping, which are really good at looking at structures like your tendons,
Mm.
to look how they're absorbing and releasing force, whether you're compensating on one side or the other, and
Mm.
when you're landing post injury.
Mm.
So, some of the tests that I might use are something called a 10-5 hop test, which is
Yeah.
where you're bouncing on the plates for 10 hops, and it
Yeah.
measures so much data. So,
Yeah. So we know that lots of physios are starting to now use force plates.
Yeah.
I know that you're particularly using this with a lot of... What are force plates, and what would a patient expect to happen in such an assessment?
Sure. Yeah. It's so force plates are basically they're sort of a rectangle platform that measures the amount of force and contact that you have on them. So they churn out lots and lots of data, but essentially they can measure sort of imbalances from left versus right, the amount of strength that you're putting out in certain joints and areas,
Yeah.
which can help us understand, you know, how to adapt your training and things like that.
Yeah. So a very sophisticated set of scales we're talking about here.
Exactly. Yeah. To boil it down, it is a sophisticated set of scales that tells you a lot of information on that stuff.
And so it's going to say which part of the foot they're putting their weight through, as well as whether they're putting their weight through their right or left foot. Is that right?
So it more tells you, definitely left and right, sort of distribution of how much weight you're putting through each of those, and sort of how much force how much weight you're sort of putting through on an action. And we can use that data to tailor gym programs, to tailor running programs, to tailor any sort of sport, and to keep you doing the sport.
And I guess with the jumps, it's telling us about contact time. Is that right as well?
Exactly, and that's really important in especially your running, jumping sports. To measure how much time you spend on the ground, maybe versus how much time you spend in the air, which is important, especially if you've had a tendon injury in the past. Sometimes people can have these deficits and reductions in how much time they spend on the ground, and that can lead to increased injury risk as well.
And there's a growing bank of sort of normal data, I guess. Is that right?
Completely. I mean, this was previously reserved for sort of elite athletes and really top end athletes in sports clubs, but now it's starting to filter through, and we've got a lot more data on what is needed for people that are doing things from a semi-pro level and just a recreational level as well.
And so, if I'm coming to see you, well, we won't use me as an example. No, but so just your normal recreational athlete, they're being compared with someone of their level, basically, rather than an elite athlete's data will be different, we're saying,
Yeah, completely. And I will tailor it to the person's age and their gender. I've got a lot of data on what the norm is for someone of a particular age and a particular sport as well. So if someone comes in to see me, I'll try and understand what sport it is they're doing, and what they want to either get back to doing or keep doing. And from there, I'll choose a battery of tests, which will help me to form a bit of an idea of where they're at based on sort of where the norm is for what they want to do.
And I mean, I've obviously seen it. I mean, I love the seeing in numbers, in metrics, like this is where you are. This is what you need to get to in order to sort of even yourself up. And, presumably particularly sort of appeals to patients that like that sort of feedback.
Yeah, definitely. And it gives you a real bit of understanding of whether what you're doing is making a difference or not, and you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And for me, I think it's really good tying that with also symptoms and things like that. So if you get if you see where you're at the start point and you retest 6 or 8 weeks later, seeing that you've improved and your times of improving with your running or your sport, it's a fantastic bit of feedback as well.
I love that, because I want to move away from the, you go back to see the physio and you're like, oh, you're doing that so much better than you were 6 weeks ago. We want data. It's 2025. So we can use this podcast for a bit longer. It's it's post 2025.
Exactly.
So, but I believe that we should be using this sort of science, and I love to see this integrated with rehab and physio and what we're doing, and the capability to do these things is there.
Exactly, and it just takes out the guesswork. And, I mean, us as clinicians are not having to guess and push against someone's leg or arm and say, oh, that feels a bit stronger than it did last week.
Exactly,
we can actually say, okay, it's gone from X amount to X amount plus 10, and it's great.
And it allows us to recalibrate our knowledge and understanding of what strength deficits are, significant. And, the impacts of injury and how it affects all these things as well, doesn't it?
Exactly. All the way down to whether someone's overly fatigued or not, there's so many times where people are starting, 12 or 16 week running programs, and it's good to track at certain points to sort of see that you're not, at risk of injury or things like that.
And this is so important, isn't it? Because we can put someone on a treadmill. And look at the way they're running. But you say, but I'm not running like this after 10 kilometres when my pain comes on.
No, and we can't have them running in the session for 10 kilometres before we see them. So and it's really, really good from that perspective, and it translates across all sorts of sports. Whether you're a recreational individual or whether you're an athlete that's trying to push for a certain time, from Ironman to London Marathon to tennis to martial arts. It gives so much data.
So it's showing up not only strength, but how quickly the muscles fatigue.
Completely. And you can track so much information, see how it fatigues over sort of a maximal effort. Or even seeing how it fatigues over sort of repeated efforts of things as well.
And what do we know about the implications of a muscle that's fatiguing more quickly?
So if a muscle's fatiguing more quickly and you're having to repeatedly do an action like a run or a jump, it increases the risk of injury basically, because the muscle's not going to be able to withstand what you want it to do. And it will just say, I've had enough. I don't want to. I don't want to work this hard anymore. So you might end up with a potential bit of a strain or an injury. And that will keep you out longer. So getting this data and information means that we can hopefully tailor programs to be able to get people to stay in the sport and mitigate their injury risk.
Much more insight into what's actually happening with those muscles, how it's going to affect our form and everything.
Yeah, completely. And especially as people get fatigued when they're running, they might load certain muscle groups a little bit more or less, and it's about piecing together our knowledge. And I find it's using force plates is another piece of the jigsaw puzzle for physios, because we can combine that with, looking at movement, your form, what symptoms you've got. And it just gives us so much more of a rounded picture.
It's what I found really interesting when I sort of had a go at being sort of force plate was how much I could start to actually feel what was showing up on the day. So that was a really, hadn't expected that. And that was a really interesting part of it for me, was that I could actually then start to go, I can feel what that is picking up in terms of the weakness on one side to the other.
Completely. And we commonly have this misconception that our dominant side is so much stronger than our non-dominant side. And sometimes you put people on the force plate and they go, actually, I'm right-handed, but you know, my right shoulder feels like it's a lot weaker than my left shoulder, you know, and
Yeah.
or whatever. And it really does help with that. And then the other point is when you use that information, because it's got to be useful information.
Yeah.
And you write a gym program, and people say, I feel so much stronger because I'm targeting my gym program specifically to what I need.
Yeah, I mean, I can vouch for that. 100% helped me with that
Yes.
because I knew what I was going to be tested on again,
Yes.
and I knew what it needed to feel like.
Yes.
So when I was in the gym, it just gave me so much more insight into what it had to feel like in order to be different when I retested.
Totally, and it just gives you a real focus on what you need to do, and ultimately it's helped me as a clinician to get people back quicker because I can be really laser focused with what specific things do we need to target based on the imbalances and deficits, and therefore we can achieve them quicker rather than having a bit of a scattergun approach and guessing a little bit more.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to ask you this, Jay. So top 3 things that you find the force plates, you know, where you integrate them with assessment and rehabilitation. What would you say to that?
So any Achilles tendon rehab.
Yeah.
So commonly in runners.
Yeah.
I really like to look at sort of the hop testing or drop jump test, and that gives me an indication of how the tendon's doing. The other thing I like to do is in sort of any sort of knee based injury, like an ACL injury or a meniscus injury, doing like isometric pushes, so maximal pushes against a bar with your force plates to get a picture of maximal strength.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I like looking at left versus right as well, and threshold data. So making sure, basically looking at what are the numbers that people need to hit to tolerate doing the sport that they're doing, and seeing whether they hit above that and go.
Brilliant. Yeah, excellent. Such an amazing adjunct, I think, to what we're doing. I really do.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Jake.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.